And we're live. Welcome to International Women's Day at Vonage. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Amanda Cavallaro, and I'll do a quick visual description. I am a brunette Latina woman. I'm wearing a black t shirt, and behind me, you can see many action figures. We're going to welcome many people here to come to talk to you today. We have some pre selected questions, but you also are very welcome to share your questions, to ask your questions in the chat. Let's do a bit of housekeeping. So, as I'm saying in the chat, you can use the chat box on the right to share your thoughts, if you're liking it, if you have any questions. We also have the Q&A tab in the chat box to ask your questions. And big shout out to two people from Vonage who are there to help you out. We have Benjamin and we also have Garen. So they are going to say hi in the chat now and say hi in the chat now and also drop their links for you to follow them, to interact with them. We also welcome you to stay after all the talks are here for you to join us in the networking section in which Garen is going to host a conversation so we can all network and talk to each other there. And we also have a code of conduct. This can be found on hopping on the welcome text on the homepage of the event. So let's meet our speakers. Let me invite the very first one. I have Shuba, who is a VP product of Dev Experience and Design here at Vonage. Shuba, if you could do a visual description of yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shuba, like Amanda just introduced me. I am a South Asian woman who's a brunette, wearing a blue blouse, and my background is a gray wall. Very happy
Thank
to be
you.
here.
Very happy to have you here today, too. Our second speaker we have here in our panel is Sarah Theon. She's a co-founder of DevRel Folks in Asia. Welcome, Sarah. Could you do a visual description, please?
Sure, thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm an Southeast Asian lady with long black hair wearing headphones, and my background has two paintings.
Thank you very much. And finally, we have Jessica West, who is a VP of Dev Experience and Customer Education at Lacework. Welcome, Jessica. Could you also describe
Thank you.
yourself, please?
Yes, as mentioned, hello, I'm Jessica West. I am a Caucasian woman with dark hair, with a little bit of a red pop because you got to do something fun. And my background has some air plants and some more plants that my husband lovingly keeps alive for me.
Love the plants. Very, very good. So today the topic for our conversation is going to be to supercharge your DevRel career journey. So I have some questions here selected for you. As I said in the beginning, I'm going to follow my questions, but if anyone at any point in the chat would like to know a bit more or ask a different question, please drop it in the chat. So let's go to the very first one. So the question is, tell us about your journey into developer relations or developer experience. How did you get started and what made you choose this field?
I'm happy to go first with this one. So, my career in DevRel got started very organically. And then, like you'll learn from our different panelists, like we do not have a single path that leads us into DevRel. And mine was one where I started out as an engineer. I was an engineer for a long time. Then I became a product manager. I became an entrepreneur. And as I grew in my product management career, my focus was on customers. It's like, how do you build a thing that delights customers? How do you address customer pain points? And as an extension of that, developers are a customer that my company sells to. So, customer experience here is essentially the same as developer experience for my team that works on self serve products. And this is essentially how I came to developer relations with the product management lens.
Very good. Maybe Sarah could go second.
Yeah, so I can share how I got into developer relations. When I was working at Microsoft doing product marketing, I was also so we had conferences and I was planning like site community events. And then I had someone from the developer relations team from Corp was traveling down to Singapore, and she was like, "Hey, you're really good at this. Like, do you want to get into developer relations?" And that's literally how I got in, and it just opened up a whole new world for me.
I guess that leaves me.
Yeah.
So I guess some places it's like more of a traditional role. I actually started out in marketing from college, and I was always interested in engineering, but through a series of events, I was told that engineering was not for me. It was a little too friendly, apparently. So I went through marketing, and I kept going in through different aspects of like learning how to build websites and really analyzing what was happening behind the scenes to drive traffic to websites. And then I started digging in more and started building website more, and decided I really liked engineering. So went into engineering, or tried a few different times, and finally made it through. And by the time I started doing engineering and breaking into that industry, I looked around. I was like, how do I find other people like me, and how do I create this? Because this is really hard, and I don't want this to be. It shouldn't be that hard, right? We should be able to break in, and just because I didn't get a computer science degree. And so one of the things that's like with developer relations, I started working on more community events and finding people that didn't have a traditional path. So I started kind of pulling at the string there. And so I was doing a lot of community events on the side or in the evening in my spare time, and I was doing engineering full time. And by the time I realized I was just working a lot, and naturally this is, I think developer relations was picking up more and more as far as popularity, and there's more than just two companies doing that in a bigger space. And so I finally made the leap and went into developer relations and experience. And one of the things that I really resonated with what Shuba mentioned about thinking about that kind of customer experience and that journey. So, beyond the journey of as an individual breaking into this space, but also as the customer, like how do we think about that beginner mindset? What's that first exposure point to our product? And how do we make sure that that's really excellent for our customer from beginning to end? And so that's a little bit about how I got in here. A little bit going through.
No, I really like that all of you seem to come from different backgrounds, but all of you landed more or less the same path. This is very, very interesting. And Jessica started talking a bit about the problems and the challenges, and I think I want to explore that a bit more, which takes us to our second question. So, what sorts of challenges have you faced along the way, and how did you tackle them? Maybe I'll start with you, Jessica. Do you have any examples that you have on the top of your mind now?
Oh, so many, but I think one of the ones that I initially tackled, I think is even in college. I took a computer science course, and I was really excited about it. I was like, look, I built a website, and I was the only woman in the class, and the course instructor was like, this is great, but because you've got a business, you're starting towards the business class, you should stick to that because you're very personable, and you'll be more successful in business and marketing than you will be in engineering. And so I listened. I didn't really know any better. And then breaking through that, then I think the next time I heard that I shouldn't be an engineer was when I was working in a startup in Boulder, Colorado. And I was working in like the kind of a hybrid function where I was pulling data and like working with different databases. And I was really trying to get into engineering. So I was teaching myself Git and Rails and Sinatra and like looking at APIs. And I was really proud of myself for doing this all on my own. And so I brought this really cool project to my engineering manager. And I said, hey, this task takes 2 days for us to manually complete. But this script that I wrote actually takes about 5 minutes. And now we can optimize for time. And like, this is so great. And I'd love a chance as an engineering internship. And then I was told no. He's like, I don't have women on my team. And so I said, okay. So then I quit the whole company because I'd realized I didn't want to work for a company that didn't promote any kind of upward, sideways, any kind of growth just because of the way I looked and what was represented of me as a person. And yeah, just I feel like I kept finding those different roadblocks and pushing through. And for those that know me, my stubbornness, I think, helped push that through. I just didn't want to take no. And I felt like more and more, I was seeing more people like me. I was like, there are women in technology, so I have to be able to find some way to get there. And I think, those are some of the early challenges and scars that I think that I like dealt with, and that helped me get to the point I'm now. And that's why I really want to make sure that I do my best to advocate for underrepresented groups and make sure that we can create a space for them to come into this world and technology, because it should be inclusive for anybody that wants to put the work in and wants to try. So
That's really inspiring. Finding all those roadblocks along the way can get really demoralizing. So well done for being where you are today. Well
thank you.
done.
Thanks.
Anyone else would like to share their
Yeah,
story?
just riffing off like what Jessica shared about helping to bring up like underrepresented profiles into DevRel. So I think coming from someone that started DevRel within Southeast Asia, I think this was probably about 3 years ago. Back then DevRel is still very new within Southeast Asia. It's still something that's growing. I think it's becoming more professionalized. Definitely on the Western side, like in the US and in Europe, it's much more developed. So there was a lot of work initially, like representing Asia Pacific in helping to bring up these profiles. And it's not so much that the space wasn't created for them. I think people held space. They were like, yeah, please bring out interesting profiles. But coming from a Southeast Asian culture as well, how do you help develop people for public speaking, make them feel confident, especially if the DevRel is new and speaking is not something that comes naturally to everyone. They're kind of like, well, I'm really good at my job, but like I don't think I deserve to be speaking, or I've never spoken before. And so there was a lot of work, and like, we created like mini midway platforms before meetups, like really small groups. Like we created one called DevSpeak, and we just asked people who have never spoken before, actually, specifically, like we looked for women profiles that are more Southeast Asian, and we were like, come speak. It'll be a crowd of 10 or 20, but start. So that was like a lot of pushing, that also like, and pushing, talking to people, getting feedback, kind of adjusting the event to suit our culture a bit more. So there was a lot of work there, just getting things started. And that's also why DevRel folks kind of started as well. Not so much with the larger community, because DevRel is still really new, but with individuals who are starting out in the space like myself, and we're trying to figure out like, what does that actually look like for our region. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges. The other one that I wanted to share from a different perspective is I think because it's also a growing industry from the South Asian side of things, it's something that takes time to demonstrate value to your organization. And it's a lot of because starting from ground zero, how do you make people aware of the need for DevRel, make them understand what it can look like as a job, and kind of constantly, even if you get the job, it's a lot of constant advocating for what's important in the community, kind of bringing that understanding that having a listening ear to your community and getting direct feedback is actually really important. And it might not translate into immediate ROI, which is a constant battle that is happening with organizations as well. So that's one of the challenges I face.
No, that's really good to know, honestly. Like the developer relation is not something that you would listen to the name like 15 years ago. People, maybe they were doing some of the things, but it didn't really have a name. So it's really nice to hear your story and how you grew a community. Thank you for sharing. How about you, Shuba?
I think I have two main thoughts here on this topic. The first one is what Jessica so poignantly highlighted, right? It's amazing that Jessica had the grit and the determination and the stubbornness to work through it and achieve all that she has. But the number of women that we lose who are not, similarly equipped, who do not have that kind of mental strength to power through those comments that you hear where women don't belong, I think that is a challenge, right? And I think that causes, like we talk about the pipeline problem, this is a classic exhibition of that, right? So that's definitely top of mind. The second thing I would add is a lot of developer relations work happens online, in online communities. That's where we meet our developers, that's where our developers are at. And it's incredible, especially in the earlier days, where where anonymity was used as a cloak for saying things to people that you would never do to their face. And it's amazing how it frees up people. Somehow they feel free to say things that they would never say to another human, leave alone a woman. It's just not something you'd say to another human face to face. But somehow the anonymity provides you this cloak where it's acceptable and it's okay to say that. This is the kind of things, and until you learn that, for me at least, it was a trial by fire to develop that thick skin and to stand, to not back away at just the open hostility or the meanness that people exhibit, to learn how to take it in your stride and how to not let it completely throw you off kilter for the rest of your day. And how do you respond to it? How do you educate people? And how do you enroll allies in helping you deal with the situation? That's been a big part of it for me.
Definitely. I don't know how many people I've seen along the way that they have great ideas, they have something they want to share, but they're afraid of people just being mean to them on the internet. It's very easy to say things when you're anonymous. Totally agree with you. So let's go to our next question. Is there anything you wish you had known before you started your career? You're smiling, Sarah.
I mean, this is like such a can of worms, right? Because how many things, man. But I mean, I think for me, before I started my DevRel career, I think one thing that probably wasn't talked about enough was so I come from a non-technical background. I'm learning as I go, but still not to the point where like I'm a full engineer. And I think very early on in DevRel, there are a lot of questions that come in, especially when you are not fully technical or previously an engineer. And I think if I had known earlier on that there was just so many parts of DevRel that one can expand into, like you can do content, you can do technical writing, you can do like program management. There are still many other various routes within it as well. If I had a lot more of the education, I think that would have helped a lot at the start for me to kind of define much earlier on, like what is it that I could possibly pursue, rather than bumping around a lot and figuring out that, oh, okay, there are other spaces for me within DevRel as well.
I'll add to it from a different perspective. Mine was a complement of what Sarah's experience was, which was do not underestimate the soft skills as an engineer. Right? It's like if someone came to me with a question for which you could use Excel, I'm like, I could probably script that faster than I can put this data into Excel. And that was my approach. And I had completely, I did not realize the value of things like communicating, right? Being able to articulate, why does it matter for you? It's like, why should you care? I think this is the best thing since sliced bread, but do you? Why should you care? Right? And unless I can explain why anyone else should care about this is just going to remain cool engineering work at the end of the day. Right? So I think that was a big aha moment for me. I was like, oh, I actually need to be able to communicate what I'm doing to other people. It's like my code doesn't just speak for itself to anyone who sees it. Maybe it does to other engineers, but not so much to everybody else outside of engineering. So,
well, points from both of you. I think building on that, I think the thing that I now understand and then I recognize, but I wish either I had been able to recognize myself or someone else told me, is that I don't have to segment or fragment my previous career or my roles. Because it wasn't the traditional, like I wasn't an engineer, right, that had incredible speaking prowess, but that because of my background in like starting in hospitality, like I was a server for my first job and learning that kind of empathetic ear or like learning, trying to predict like what the next thing that person might need, taking that skill set that I learned for that first, touch point of empathy and making sure like that's okay to bring to work. And even honestly, like even the way I present myself now, like lipstick and I curled my hair and things like that. I felt like I had to really isolate that and I had to fit in with everybody else. And I think that once I realized I could bring my full self to work and to my, to my presence, I felt so much more empowered and I felt like me. And I wish that younger self, someone told me like, you can be your full self and that's 100% okay and better. And so you should do that. So that would be, not isolating and pretending and something else. So,
yeah. I mean, Jessica, no, can I just add on to that really quickly? So one of the things I've been thinking about as well is, I think in DevRel that's always tough because we're always putting ourselves out there, like we are publicly facing so many people, and if you're not your full self, like, well, at least most of the time, it's gonna, the cracks are gonna show, and it's gonna be hard to reconcile the two different profiles you're putting out there. So I think, even more like if we knew earlier on, or just sharing with people who are listening in today, like come in with your full self, because there's no way you can keep up a different image with all the DevRel work that you'd be doing.
Yeah, and if we're asking them to be trusting us with their fully authentic self or sharing their problems, then we should be representing that ourselves, right? It's
Yeah.
all like how many times we talk about authenticity in developer relations. It's all the time. So if we can't even bring that full self, then they think that's like the first break. So
I totally agree because what I always say is I can just go and learn something from, I don't know, from documentation. Why would I waste my time? Because we also want to get to know that person. They are advocating for the company, for, for themselves. So I think it comes with something new, the way that you explain everything. I really like it. So we have a question here from the chat, from Daphne. So have you ever had a mentor in developer relations? If so, how did you find them? How can people find mentors? Can you share your story if you had, or maybe you didn't have?
I'm happy to take that one. So I did not have a specific mentor, especially just for DevRel, right? Because the way I think about it is, as you go through your career, different challenges pop up as you progress through your career. And the way I've found support in approaching these issues is like I have a board of advisors almost, right? So I know that if I have a particularly sticky problem where I need to have this difficult conversation and I don't know how to phrase it, I reach out to this person who I know is the master diplomat, at least in my eyes. They know exactly the right way to phrase something so that the point is made, but at the same time, it's not, it doesn't cause friction. So I have this network of people that I rely on for specific challenges that I have. Or if it is, let's say, a career conversation that I need to have. Now, and then I need to do some kind of self-reflection about, hey, it's like, am I at a point where I'm ready to take the next step in my career? Now, what should I do? Is this the right path for me to go? I work with a different person who I know has been on a similar career journey to mine and has successfully, crossed that bridge that I'm trying to cross. So I try to ask them, as I say, hey, I need your candid feedback. It's like, this is my skill set, this is where I am, and this is where I want to go. Do you think I'm ready? Or what skills do I need to add to my portfolio in order to be able to cross that bridge? Right. And I can ask this in a very safe, non-confrontational space, right? It's like, and then when I take it back and I reflect on it, and then when I go have a conversation with my manager, now I have a much more self-aware conversation where I can say, yep, I understand this is who I am. I understand that this is where I need to be in order to get here. And I would love for you to help me find opportunities to grow this muscle, to flex this muscle. Right. So my answer here is like it's not a one mentor for everything, but more a board of directors for you lean on different set of people for different challenges that you encounter along your career.
yeah, I would just, adding on to what Shuba mentions, I think didn't have a DevRel specific mentor or someone that could say like, here's the best path, or here's how you can hone these skills. But I feel extremely fortunate that I, from some of the work that I was doing early on with the community, that I found some amazing people that I still, are part of my like core group, my inner circle right now. That I can lean on and talk about like, hey, what is the best way to tackle this situation, or what do you think about this, and just getting an outside perspective, and having that core group, and if you are able, so I said, if at any point you have any kind of access to some kind of executive coaching or any kind of budget you can put towards that learning one, I've put it towards coaches in previous roles and even now, and it made such a huge difference, right? Because it gave me a safer space for me to really work through some of the challenges I was facing outside of my boss, right? Because my boss, of course, is hopefully is a safe space of talking through that. But having that outside mentor to help me ramp up on top of my community makes a world of difference. And so that's been the mentorship that I've taken advantage of now.
Yeah. So I mean, resonating with what Shuba said earlier, I and also with the both of the ladies, I don't actually have a mentor specifically for DevRel. I think on the topic of mentorship, because I've also had like a jungle gym career where I've gone through different roles, I found that having a specific mentor hasn't been the most helpful in my case. For me, and I think, well, the way I see it is that the nature of DevRel is that you would be multidisciplinary, and being multidisciplinary helped me to have various people that I could do checkpoints with, like what Shuba mentioned. So I have like a group of people that I know a certain person is particularly good in public speaking and someone else is good at project design with engineers. So these are the people that I would check in with every now and then to just have a reality check on what I could do. And then, going the other way, like I think there have been some questions, like again, because I operate, like I come from a market that's more nascent in DevRel, like people have reached out as well, like how do I get into DevRel? Could you give me some tips, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, oh, I'm a mentor now, and that was a weird turning point. But when I started doing that, I realized that specific for DevRel, it didn't work for me either to say like, hey, here's the one roadmap to get into DevRel. The best that I could possibly share was like, here is my journey, and like take what you will from it, but don't hold yourself to one path. Like go figure what it is that works for you, because there's no way it will look the same for you in DevRel. And if you can do other things, you could excel in different ways than I can. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents on what mentoring within DevRel looked like for me.
One thing that I noticed that all of you mentioned is there's many skills, there's many things. I didn't have a mentor for this or for that. So that takes me to the next question. What would you say are some of the key skills required for this career, especially in the leadership role?
I can start. Sure. I did like the deep breath. I'm like, ooh, where do we start? I was on mute for a minute, but that was what was happening in the background. So I'd say, one of the number one things, and this goes back to, and I don't like using this word, but I'll just say it, like between the soft and the hard skills, because I don't think anything about communicating effectively is easy. And so I always try and challenge that one. But I will say, communication, I think, is number one, whether that be when you're working with a group of people. And if you think about any engineers that you work with that you really enjoy, it's because they can usually communicate well, right? Whether that be through written or through verbally, and they're able to help bring everybody to where they're to the same table, right? And I think that continues to build on as you go and grow within your career. So being able to communicate upwards to your management and to your executive sponsors of, hey, this is what I'm building, this is what I believe in, and here's some of the challenges and here's some of the successes, whether that be communicating sideways and talking with your partners and your stakeholders about what you're working on, and then communicating to your team. It's just, I feel like, and I guess that leads to the other one, is like communication and being agile and being able to go from one thing to another and popping in different conversations of, now I'm wearing my marketing hat, and now I'm wearing my engineering hat, and now I'm talking with product, and now my executive sponsor, and now I'm going here and there, and just being able to context switch there will be hugely beneficial to you. And then everything else is gravy, right? I mean, engineering skills, writing, and everything else, but I think that's where I look at a lot, and that's what I'm looking at when I even talk with candidates of how they communicate.
I see that Shuba is nodding a lot. You have to be the next one. Go ahead, share with us.
No, absolutely. Like, I could not agree more with Jessica. I think communication is absolutely critical. The second thing I would add on top of that, obviously, along with communication, is the collaboration piece. Because especially in DevRel, we have stakeholders pretty much across the company, whether it's customer success, sales, engineering, marketing. It's like everybody is like, we sit at the intersection of so many different disciplines that in many ways is like DevRel is the glue that actually brings all of these people together on the same page, right? So it's like, that's really important, to be a good collaborator, right? To be a good contributor. The third thing that I would add here is the ability to zoom, especially in a leadership role, because constantly as I go through my day, I'm in a meeting with executives where I'm looking at the big picture, the strategy, and what's the vision and what's the mission and that sort of thing. And then I go into a meeting with my team where we talk about what's the plan, how are we converting the strategy to tactics, how are the tactics working, how are we measuring these tactics, how are we following through. So this ability to constantly be able to zoom, whether it's the 10,000 foot or the 1,000 foot, and to go between them fluidly, right, and across the breadth of topics. I think that is really important in order to be successful in a leadership role.
Yeah, I was trying to think of what the name of the Medium article was, but I read this really good article. So one of my pseudo mentors sent me this article like early on, and it was this Medium article that was written by a lady about how not particularly DevRel, but DevRel type roles are like the glue of the organization, and how intangible it is to intangible, but also equally valuable it is to have that glue. And it was such a comforting like article to read, especially when you're in DevRel and you're like, oh, my role is valid. But so according to what like Shuba said, I think I resonate with that as well. The other thing that I was thinking about in terms of like skills that I think a leadership position will need to have, I think the community part of it never goes away. So in my perspective, I think even at a leadership level, it is really important. And I think for the successful leaders that I've seen in DevRel, they constantly have a ear to the community, like the one-to-ones and the being in there. Like even when you have all that like upward communicating to leadership and everything that you need to do, these are the people that are still in communication, still having a ear to the ground. And I think those are the kinds that I respect the most. And they seem to be the most successful as well when they lead a team.
Very good tips you're sharing with us. So people who are starting their career now, who are in the chat, take note. Let's go to the next one. So the International Women's Day theme for this year is Break the Bias. What are some of the tips, since you shared so many good tips? So what are some of the tips you have to help women tackle gender bias?
I'm happy to tackle this one. So I have three. I think the first one is ask, don't assume, right? And we've all seen these not all tags, right? That is very much true here. It's like, we mean well and we make certain assumptions, but that may not necessarily be applicable to this person that you're dealing with, right? I'll give you a classic example of what just happened recently with me with my manager, Swaminathan, and I thought it was brilliant. So I had a challenge with my parents' health, and I was really worried about my parents, and that was weighing on my mind. Savne was absolutely incredible. He said, take what time you need, family first. That's the right thing to do. And I totally appreciated where he was coming from. But my response to that was, you know what? I'm 8,000 miles away. I really can't do much. And I'm going out of my mind with worry just thinking about it. So it's like having this work that I can actually, dive into, that I can focus on is actually a great relief because it gives me something else to think about, something else to, focus my frustration and my energy on. And this was a win-win outlet. But I really appreciate the fact that he asked me, what is it that I needed, right? Instead of assuming that, oh, she probably needs a bunch of time off and she needs to go and I need to find a plan B, instead of going down that whole track, the fact that he offered, he made the space where if I needed the time, I could have it. But he also came back with, is that what you need, right? That was so incredibly powerful. So to ask someone, when you feel like their situation and background and you mean well and you mean to support, it's always worth asking. It's like, hey, is this what you need? Or is there something else that would be more helpful to you? As obvious as it sounds, it doesn't happen often enough. A lot of people, with complete good intent, sometimes go off down the track that does not serve anyone well. So that's number one. Number two is to ask for feedback on your bias. Because sometimes it's like we are so in it that we don't see for ourselves what our biases are. So every now and then, take the time to stop, check in and say, hey, it's like, please give me some feedback. It's like, do you see anything, where there might be some, where it's coming across as bias? Maybe I don't mean it, but maybe that's how it's coming across, right? To basically understand how you're being perceived and manage those perceptions. And if there is an issue that you need to address, do that work. Do that work and, own up to it, apologize, do the work that's needed to become the better person that you're capable of being. So that's number two. And the third one is for managers, and it's a very tactical thing. When we do performance reviews, it's like I highly, highly encourage everyone to apply a different lens, right? For example, earlier in my career, I've received feedback such as, hey, you are a very bubbly person, right? Before you offer feedback like that, just think, it's like if it were a man sitting in front of you, would you tell him you're bubbly? Right? Just for a second, before something comes out, before you communicate something, just say, hey, let me apply a different lens. Would I say this to a man? If you wouldn't say it to a man, don't say it to a woman. It's not cool. Right? I think that contextual framing, it's like reframing the situation and putting yourself in the listener's shoes is highly helpful. Again, I think it goes back to the whole empathy piece that Jessica was talking about.
If I can add on to it, I think one of the things that I really appreciate that you pointed out, Shuba, is almost like holding up a mirror, right, to our colleagues and everybody we're interacting with, and reminding them. And I think that's part of breaking the bias is as we as we're continuing to, go within, as the world keeps turning, and as we have more and more of these resources available, and ideally, hopefully, we're moving forward, and creating that a better, more inclusive area. Part of that is reminding people of like, hey, this is where we're at. So pointing out when people say females versus women, like, oh, just quick question, just like, we don't say males, we say men, so just as a reminder, and bringing that forward, or say, hey, would you say this to me if I looked a little bit different, and just honestly doing having this like a friendly reminder. And I think you can do it in a really tactful manner, and you can do it tactful, not a tactful. Sorry, I can realize I say speak quickly. I just wanted to clarify that. And then also doing it, and so it's not to a point that's exhausting to you. So make sure that you're in a good spot, because it shouldn't be up to us completely to educate everybody. But there are some things that we can start doing and piecemealing, right? And that, a pebble eventually builds into a mountain, sort of thing. So any little things that we can all do to help bring that awareness more towards that, I think that will be breaking down the bias.
Yeah, I think Sarah, resonating with both of what they said, I agree. I think there's a lot of awareness, and it's hard. It's hard to, especially if you're the one that's the female, and like bringing up the question that like, is it a panel again? Can we have more females on the panel, and so on and so forth? And everyone's always like, it's because you're a woman, right? And I'm like, no, it is because it's something that's important. So it's not easy to be vocal about these things, and I think there's a lot of work that unfortunately we also have to keep doing. So I think that's one aspect of it. From my perspective, I think there's also another aspect where I think from my culture at least, like coming in as like a younger female profile, there are certain expectations of how you would, what your position is in like a group setting, for example. And so, like doing the administrative task, or are you here to provide F&B, and questions like that, or you would be nicer to the guys, and not in very different profile from like when men come in and they are the engineer on stage, and they're like, oh, who are you to be on stage, and not explicitly, a lot of it is very implicit, but it's there, and I feel this bias a lot. I think things around what I've done about it is that I don't know how to describe this. I try my best to go in thinking that like, okay, I'm a man. I'm a tech bro, and like how would I like function, right? So like when Shuba mentioned like ask, don't question, ask and don't just like wait for someone to ask you to do something. Being proactive and being like forward and speaking more definitive statements. I think these are all like the small things as well that kind of change that perception of, oh, I guess Sarah is the one that is in the middle of the network, and she knows people, and we need to take her seriously. And there's a lot of like mini ways that you have to, especially because there's a lot of community engagement, how you come across to people and how you maintain that profile. And it is tiring, but I think it helps over time when people stop regarding you as like the young female in the room that is not actually leading the situation. So yeah, that would be my tip.
That reminds me of a story. So I had a boss who was a woman, and every time we would take notes during the meeting, it was always me. And then, but people would say that she's so good at taking notes. So I was just taking. And one day she's like, no, this can't happen. She's the only woman in the room. She can't be the one taking notes. And I never realized that was a problem or anything, but I was so happy that she called it out, because we tend to assume things sometimes. Oh, she's a woman, she's better at doing this, just for the fact that she's a woman. So we should really, really have our biases in check. And on that note as well, do you have you ever struggled with imposter syndrome working in tech?
If someone says no, anyone, like, not even on this panel, anywhere else, I was like, liar. I feel like, I'm sorry, I just always.
So, okay, so since everyone struggled or have felt that in some way, do you have any tips or maybe a story to share on how you managed that?
So there's this exercise that I do with my friends. I'm not saying it's the most PC thing that you put on LinkedIn, but for me, what I do is when I'm having imposter syndrome or my friend is having it, then we will both imagine ourselves to be male and or white, or in Asia, Chinese or something, and we'll be like, oh, how would we function? And then we'll just do like a mini like skit kind of rehearsal on like what would we say. Like we would not say please or just, we would just be like, do it immediately. And then we would just check each other and kind of change and just kind of reframe how we think about ourselves at our current skill level, knowing that if other people can do that, then why should we not? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So I was just trying to take a step back out of it, because sometimes with imposter syndrome, and jokes aside, it's because we are our own worst critic, right? We're always thinking that like, oh, I could be better, I could be doing these things. And if we take a step back and really try and look at it from another lens, my friend and I will do it too. Is like, hey, I would never say that about you, right? I would never think that you are unqualified in your role because I think that you're amazing, right? So if I try and take it, like I'm going to look at it from the way one of my friends or my mentors looks at me. It can be hard, but I think that's that's the very first exercise you can do to try and break that down and move forward that imposter syndrome. And, there's like the fake it till you make it. There's all sorts of things that you can then make sure that you kind of buffer up. I call it peacocking, like I'm here. And sometimes you have to make a little bit of like a presence and think about that in your head to make sure that you feel comfortable even being there on stage. And so I think there's a way to do that. It's just trying to do that mental gymnastics a little bit.
Absolutely. I think I'll add on to what they said, right? And also a slightly different perspective. Imposter syndrome is something that, goes with an individual. I don't think it's based on a particular gender or it's based on a particular minority or, it's not limited to that tiny niche. It's more to do with an individual and the personality. And there's a lot of other situational and social factors that play into this whole imposter syndrome thing. I think one thing that we can do, the rest of us can do to help in this situation is, it goes back to what Jessica was saying, about making it safe to bring your authentic self to work. It is okay to say, I don't know this. It's like, can you explain this to me? Right? And I completely understand how it's easier for me to say it in hindsight, and I think it's gotten easier the further along I am in my career to be the dumb person in the room and say, hey, I don't understand this. Would you please explain it to me? It was not easy when I started out. Absolutely. I'm not saying that I could do it before, but what I have now learned is like having, at least looking back at my career, is it's completely okay to ask those questions, because there's a really good chance that I'm not the only person in the room who does not know the answer to that question. Right? And who are the other persons who was concerned about, not appearing smart enough or not knowing the answers? It's like, know that it's a safe space. It's okay. I'm making room for you. There's space here for you to say you don't understand, that you're not familiar with this concept, and it's okay to ask. Right? And a lot of that is, I think that safe space happens because it's like when leadership makes it clear that it's okay to ask such questions, right? And there is no stigma, and you role model it. I think that is a very powerful statement. When you have the leader and they say, I don't understand that. Can you explain that, please? And I think it opens the doors for everyone else to feel safe about coming out and saying, I get this and I don't get this other thing. So please help me understand.
I think it goes also with what Jessica was saying in the beginning of our chat, that when you are in a toxic place, you have not only your own imposter syndrome, but people who are putting their own stigma, their own biases onto you. So I think that takes us to our next question. Well, I have it written here. Let me read. What are the performance metrics used in your performance evaluation? What's the way that we can, I have a goal. How can I reach that and trust more in myself and not let other people put that onto me? So if we could share a bit about metrics. I know it's very different. You've worked in various companies. It changes from company to company. So
the question is
maybe,
about how.
do you want me to repeat the question? Lucinda, who is in the back, could you get our question here again? Thank you. So what are the performance metrics used in your performance evaluation? And that could be in your own, or maybe to someone in your team.
Okay, I can start here. I would collate across the different roles that I've done in DevRel. Do not be specific to any organization. I think technology adoption is a clear one. How many users do you have? Whether it is via tracking leads, because I think the hard part, in general, the way I've seen it so far is that it's always hard to tag the DevRel work that you've done directly to the business outcomes that the business, like the tangible ones that the business needs to justify investing in your role. So the two outcomes I've worked for is would be a technology adoption, the other one would be talent leads that come in, and then the last one would be around views of our content, and then we have various ways that we would measure indicators to come to this result. So even for let's say like talent leads, it could also be around like how many mentors do we get that signed up with us, and that eventually will lead to a talent lead. And then of course, how many are we putting through the interviewing process? And we have to have that middle tier of indicators, because it's very hard to draw that direct relation to the business outcome.
Yeah, I would. I think what spot on talking about the adoption, right, in the engagement. One of the things that we look at really across board for that performance aspect is also the engagement, like how active users are with our product, not only within our community, but within the products. Like how often are they coming into like making those API calls or logging into the product or whatever active looks like at the company, like whatever like that best practice is. And I think the other thing that we look at too is kind of some onboarding metrics, like what's the onboarding metric we have right now, and how can we shorten that, or how can we get that NPS score up for understanding of like, oh, I understand the product, I get it right now, and how do I continue evaluating and iterating on that, are some of the things that I think are more of a deeper metric beyond what I think we traditionally see in DevRel is like the awareness one of, so like how many unique views do I have in my content, but then how do I take that to the deeper level and go through the performance of the team?
Yeah, so the question here is not very clear if you, the person who asked in the chat, if what you're referring to is the employee's performance or is it the product metrics? So because it's not very clear, please feel free to reply how it's easier for you here.
Just to clarify, so the outcomes I mentioned earlier on would then add towards my performance evaluation. So it would be, well, I think for DevRel, the two cases, I mean, the two main roles that I've done, it's never been a strict KPI. It's always been a soft OKR. Again, to my earlier point that it is very hard to draw the direct link of what I've done equals to exactly this outcome. So that's how it's been for my performance evaluation.
Yeah, sorry, I went into it's planning season, so my mind is completely in here's how we're evaluating, here's how we're talking about the team and the impact that we're gonna have in the business. But I think for performance, for myself as leading the department, I'm looking at like here are the number of programs that I've signed up to deliver and to execute on and create. So that's really, it's just like the completion point, right? And then the performance too. So as an individual, like, was I able to motivate my team to get these things done? And also did they deliver it on time? And did they deliver time and being burnt out? Are they happy? Or were they looking for more things to do? Like how what's like that employee net promoter score, right? Because we look at that through Office 5 or Medallia or whatever tool you have, or just checking in with your team. And then for the individuals on my team, it's a variety, right? Because the directors have a different performance metric than some of the individuals that are reporting up there. So, some correct engineers, like here are the number of courses that I've signed up to complete. And here's the type of customer pain points I'm coming in to listen to, and I'm going to set up these different calls. So really looking at what are the things that we're committing to and that type of impact we want to have to the business, and then rolling that up through there. I hope that helps.
Shall we go to the next question? Yeah. So what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in DevRel throughout your career? What's your vision for the future of the industry? This one is interesting because all of you have been here for quite some time. So I'm interested to know that one.
I think some of the biggest changes that I've seen, I think that's fairly easy to say. DevRel was not really a thing for quite a while in my career, right? It's like DevRel is a newly created role, if you will. And it's much like product management to me in my head, because when you say product management, it means very different things to different people at different companies. And everyone can do product management sort of thing, right? It's like everyone is a product manager at heart, one way or another, because the scope is very wildly different even between different companies and verticals and industries. So DevRel is something similar because what DevRel means in one company is not necessarily what it means at another place, right? And so that's a part of the, I think, evolution. I think as we become more mature in the career path that is DevRel, I think we are now starting to put shape to what DevRel should look like. So, for example, at Vonage, like we are very fortunate to have a large DevRel team, and this is a key area of investment for us. So we have 5 different sub teams, right? Each focused on a particular part of DevRel, and each one of them have their own career path, and they all have lateral mobility opportunities. So we have a tooling team, we have a startup team, we have a documentation team. So in that sense, it's definitely evolving to become more mature. And as to what's the vision for the future of, I'm assuming DevRel, not industry. I think DevRel is going to become more and more important as we go forward, because if for anyone who's been following the business world, it's pretty obvious that product-led growth has led to some amazing unicorn companies, right? As in our own communication space, we have companies like Twilio. This is like 100% product-led growth. And there are several such examples of where product-led growth has created multi-billion-dollar companies. And as people start to see the value in product-led growth, I think DevRel is going to become a very key and important piece of this, because the more that you can empathize with your users who are developers, the better off the product offering that you're going to be building, and the better the product, then more the adoption, right? It's a pretty straight path from how does developer experience translate to dollars at the end of the day. It is a pretty straight and clear line that we can draw in companies that have product-led growth.
Yeah, and just to, topping off what Shuba mentioned, I think the biggest thing we've seen is really developer relations getting more formalized, right, and being more popular and accessible at different companies, and understanding the impact it has with product. And so my what I would love to see as we continue maturing, and we're starting to see a little bit right now, is having more of a metric-driven approach and really thinking about that business impact and how we continue iterating that. So I think that we will continue building on it and how we become more and more integrated with the company, rather than being like almost an afterthought or a side, like, oh, we're not quite sure where to go, so we'll put it here, or moving it around. So I hope that as we continue maturing and creating this this part of the industry, is that we can really make sure that we leave like a better area for our future friends coming into this space. So
Yeah, from my side, so I agree with both of them that DevRel is maturing. From an Asia perspective, I would say that also comes with job opportunities coming in. A lot of them are flowing into Asia. People are expanding and expanding engineering units there, and therefore DevRel is going to become increasingly important. Especially if you're in, it can be any continent or area per se, but if it's highly localized, that's where I think your value will come in a lot. And so if you're DevRel in a localized area where there's a specific language and there's a huge critical mass of developers like Indonesia, Vietnam, definitely start thinking about, do you want a career in DevRel, because there's a lot that you can do there. In terms of how I think the industry will look like in the future, so one thing that I've been toying around and researching a lot on is that I think the pandemic has kind of made meetups become very different and look very different. So the usual culture of having in-person events, the way we used to do it like 2 years ago, I was so used to doing it as a process, and I realized very recently that it's something that is changing very quickly, and you have to be able to cater to both formats. So the previous format, which is in-person meetups, but then also looking around Discord, understanding how these communities form now. I don't want to be the person here to bring up Web3, but I'm going to be that person that, Web3 is coming up and things are changing very rapidly. Like whole companies have been built around decentralized communities and the metaverse and so on. So definitely have to explore a lot more on that side and get ready for that change.
Absolutely. Thank you for your input. And we have our final question here. So I know it's the final question. Maybe you have more things you'd like to ask. So definitely follow the speakers here on their social media that we're going to share in the chat. So the conversation doesn't have to end now. And also we have the session of networking afterwards. So don't get too sad. So we received the question. Any advice about how to prepare for a DevRel interview? And thinking that DevRel, there are different things that you can do. You can be a community manager, you can be a developer advocate. So please, when you're giving your answer, explain maybe if you're referring to like generally or to one specific. So whoever would like to go first.
Can I take this one first? I have many thoughts. Okay. So I think one of the things that it really helps no matter where you are within the developer relations team, whether that's in community, education, even partner engineering or developer advocate, is familiarizing yourself with the product. So go poke around a little bit, like seeing when you Google Vonage, say like, hey, Vonage, and then you start seeing like the auto commute, like Vonage community, Vonage SDKs, and Vonage versus, and seeing what comes up and really looking at familiarizing yourself with that product, because the number one thing you're going to do no matter where you're at is talking about the differentiator you're going to have as that product, right? So and understanding a little bit more of like that kind of that customer experience. So one of the things I always love seeing if someone comes to the interview as prepped is like, oh, I was in your community forum, or maybe you don't have a community forum. I noticed there's nothing there. But in the community forum, I saw this question, and I even like if they responded, bonus points, right? Or if they found like an open question on Stack Overflow and responded with something of like, oh, have you tried this? Or making like a call, like, so anything, those kind of community aspects are great. And then from the more engineering focused roles, if you open a PR, maybe against like, some of the open source like SDK libraries, or have some kind of create some like demo, just playing around with it and understanding what was that onboarding experience. All of these things are amazing talking points to bring you to that interview. And no matter where you are, you'll have a good foundation. And it's something I just love seeing from everybody.
Couldn't agree more with what Jessica just said. It's like, we need to dogfood the product before you come to the interview. I think I'll also, because DevRel is what it is and the stage of maturity we are at, the other thing I would point out is to take the time to understand what DevRel means at the company at which you're interviewing versus your mental image of what DevRel is. Right? Oftentimes there is a disconnect. It's like, you go in thinking that you're applying for a certain role because the title is developer advocate. But like I think we've been talking about this long enough. It means such different things at different companies that it's worth taking the time to closely read the job description. Use the interview as an opportunity to clarify whether the role that you have in mind is truly the one that they're hiring for. Right? Because this mismatch, just because the title happens to be the same, the mismatch between what the company is looking for versus what the candidate is looking for can oftentimes down the line lead to friction if this is not addressed. So use the interview as an opportunity to speak with your interviewers to find out how they're thinking about this role and how that fits and whether that's aligned with how you're approaching that role as well.
Very, very good. So these were all the questions that we had for today. I know that we want to share a lot more, so definitely stay here afterwards. And I would like to thank you for your time. Thank you, Jessica, Sarah, and Shuba.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah,
it was
amazing moderator.
Yep.
Thank you very much. So, by the way, we're talking here about interviewing, about, different positions in DevRel. So just so you know, we are hiring. And if you have a way of getting the QR code there, you can see all the positions we have available. If not, don't worry. We also have vonage.com/careers. So at Vonage, we celebrate diversity as it is in the best interest of our employees, customers, and community to do so. Vonage is proud to be an equal opportunity workplace. So definitely check it out if you're looking for a job. Thank you very much. And now we're going to have our networking with Garen. So for us to be able to go to the networking, how do we do that? We go on the left menu. We're going to go to sessions. And then you can see networking lounge. It's currently open now. So if you go on Hopin, on the left, there is reception, stage, and sessions. And you can go there right now and continue the conversation on the networking lounge. So you can join with your camera, or if you prefer not to have your camera on, if you prefer to be in the chat, however way you're comfortable to join, you're very welcome, and we'll continue the conversation there. Have a good time and happy International Women's Day. Thank you, everyone.